So in this video, we're going to talk about how to security trim your Power App forms using custom roles that you will need for your business process, all implemented in an elegant way. Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to start looking at a way how you can secure your forms. And I think when you're transitioning to PowerApps from InfoPath or Nintex, is some of these requirements that you look at and say, okay, how do I do this in PowerApps? And security trimming your form is one of those pieces. So if you take a look at the form that we have now, we have these various tabs, right? And we have in edit mode, we have tabs here, and we covered in the previous video on how you establish these tabs. So now let's just pretend that for this form, you have to be of a certain role, and not necessarily a SharePoint role. We're talking about a role for this process, which is more real world scenario. Whereas you create this process and you may have an admin for that process, you may have an approver for that process, you may have, we're going to call it buyer, which is like a different role, but that's higher than your standard user who's submitting requests within that process. And based on their role, and sometimes based on where they are in the workflow process, you may want to enable or disable or hide or show certain fields or capabilities. So in this video, we're actually going to walk through that. Now, when it comes to securing a InfoPath form, and I'm not talking about securing in the sense who can see it and who cannot see it. That's pretty simple, and you can do that through SharePoint pretty easily. But I'm securing as far as leveraging roles. There's many different ways that you can do that. Now, one way would be to, and this is something that I've used in the past, and which degree of implementation really depends on the complexity of the form. One way that I've sometimes done in the past is that I would create a hidden site column. So if you're looking at my list here, if you go into list settings, I'll have this hidden column that says, who are the admins, and then within that column, I will make the default value a delimited list, either comma delimit or semicolon delimit, of all of the email addresses that I want to highlight as administrators for this particular process. And then, and then in the logic of the form, I would just do a compare of the current user against that email address and hide and show different capabilities or features that way. The problem with this is if you have to add, you've been using this form for a while, and then 2 or 3 months later or a year later, you have to add in a new admin. Because this is a default value, that only applies to net new requests. So if this is a new admin, someone who just joined the department and now need to take on the admin role, you kind of have to do some data cleanup in order to make that user admin of the role. Because again, this is default value, and at the default value, it only applies when the item is created. Right, so that's a gap in that piece there. The other option is to do the same deal, right? The string delimited list, but put that within the formula of your Power Apps, and then from there just show and hide. And the pitfall with that is, and these are all valuable, right? You just have to understand the pros and cons, and sometimes you have to do something quickly just to kind of get things out the door. Hard coding it within your Power Apps form. Anytime there is a new admin or someone that needs to be added, you have to go and crack open PowerApps Studio, make the adjustment there, and then republish it in order for that to take effect. The good news with that scenario is that it does allow the administrator to be able to, the new administrator to be able to be an admin of the previous ones, unlike the first technique. But you just have to get a power user, or in some scenarios a developer involved for those types of requests. So what I'm going to show you, the technique that I'm going to show you, is how do you, one, get beyond just administrators, right, and how you manage a form with several different roles, and these are custom roles, and then how can you position that to be scalable, meaning that you can do that for many different applications within the same site collection. And what I have here, I'll just show you real quick what I have, is that I have this ACL equipment list. So basically, it has 4 columns, or 3, Application is just the rename of the title column, and we just call it application. I just, for now, hard coding that as equipment 2. And what I can do, I can put in this ACL list or access control list to manage the roles for many different applications. So if I have an equipment list, I have a trucking tracking list, or a package tracking list, or a system request list, or whatever type of process you have, you can control access with this one list versus creating multiple for that. So an application is going to allow you to do that. And then I have in here is different roles, and this is just a choice column. And I have the various roles here. If I go into QuickEdit, I can kind of expose what I have here. And these are just choice column options. And I have none there just in case you need it. But then I have admin, and I can build features and capabilities around administrators, and then approver, and so on for buyers. Now, what I would not use this list for is for the end user, like someone who just need access to submit a request. That's not what this list is for. This list is for that role that's above that or beyond the standard submitting the request role to give them additional capabilities. And then in this last column, a user column, this is a person's group or a person's column, to where, as a new entry, you can come in here, find anyone who's in your Active Directory to add them to this list. So if I wanted to look at, let's just say, for example, let's add row. Now this is funny because row is only RO, and I can't add her. It seems like the people search field, that's interesting, right? The people picker, I think, only kicks in after 3 characters, and with her first name being the character, then the space, it didn't recognize. It was hard to search. I had to use the first few letters of her email address. Anyway, so here's a people picker, and this makes it very easy to add users, right? And then you define their role. And then, again, I'm just defaulting this to equipment 2. This is probably not the best way to use that title field. You probably want something that's where the administrator who's managing the access list do not have to type it in. So maybe that's a choice field. But you kind of get that title field, and you're just like, okay, what do I do with this? So for now, I just renamed it to application. So I say that all. And boom, she's an approver for equipment 2. Now, how does all this work, and how do you leverage this list in PowerApps to control security trim certain form elements or apply different business rules? So let's jump into that. So if I'm in my PowerApps Studio here, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just a reminder, we have our view screen broken out into 3 different tabs. And then we have our edit screen in the 2 tabs to represent that one edit form. And then in this new screen, I don't have any tabs. Now, let's kind of play around with this a little bit. So what I'm going to do, let's just pick on, I'm in the edit screen, and I'm going to just pick on this details tab for now. And in this button, I'm going to change the text field to do a lookup against that ACL list to bring in, to confirm, to see which role that the current user is assigned to, right? And that's the first step. So the first step is to be able to go against that ACL list, get the current role for the current user, and then leverage that role. And then here you can define different business logic for that role. So the first thing we have to do is go into view and hit data source, and we have to have a connector to that ACL list. So I'm gonna just click on add data source. And this is going to bring up all my options. I want to create a SharePoint data source. So I just click this guy. And then from here, it should bring up all the site collections. And what it's trying to do is try to guess on which one I want by using either the Graph API or some other type of intelligence. And the one that I want here is this COM test, right? And then here's my ACL equipment access, control list here for equipment. And then I hit connect. So now I'm connected. And to reference this, it's just going to be that ACL underscore equipment. So most of the time when you bring in a data source, it just takes on the list name for that source that you're referring to, especially when it comes to SharePoint. I'm not sure about the other ones. All right, so now that we have that, what I want to do is I want to disable this list only for, only enable this button if the current user is an admin. So how would I do that? So the first thing I want to do, I want to walk through the process on how do we use that. And really it's when it comes to PowerApps, there's 3 functions that you really should become very intimate and aware of and their capabilities, right? And it's going to be the lookup, the filter, and the search. Those are the key. And I'm gonna drop this URL into the description of this video. So wherever you find it reading this video, just look at the description. I'll have a link here. This is a very good starting point to understand the 3 different methods that you will use in the PowerApp formula to go off and bring in external data. Now, without going into a lot of detail, the one that we're going to use is called Lookup. Now, Lookup is a tricky one. So Lookup has a lot of cool options to it. Now, the first thing you want to do is specify your data source or your collection. And here it's going to be ACL in our scenario. And in the next parameter, you can set your conditions. And really, this is like what do you want it to filter on, or where you're looking for that you would trim it down. So in our case, we just want to say where the role is, and this is super sweet, right? This is bringing in all the site columns for the ACL equipment list as with IntelliSense. And here I can just say where the role is admin, right? Because if I pop over here, that's the value that I'm using for my role. So if the role is admin, and that's just a string compare, and this is the double and sign, right? The user, right? And this is my site column user. I probably should have did a better job with naming this a little bit different, because user is just, depending on the context, can mean different things in different contexts. But here, this is my people group column. It's just say so user as an object, and then I go and grab that property. And usually, like if you're coming from any like JavaScript, C# or whatever programming language that you're coming from, or if you're not familiar with programming at all, I usually, for a comparison, use to the double equals. But here in this syntax, it's just a single equals, which is where you're doing it compare as to see if the value is equal to another value. So my site column user dot email is equal to my current user, and that notation is just user as a function dot email, right? So this is okay. Find me. So it's checking, right? So I don't need to go and say give me all the roles for this current user. This is doing a check, and we can do this as a Boolean check to where it says is the current user an admin based on within the ACL equipment list. So whatever schema. So this is what we're building out. And the last parameter I need to confirm is to make sure that title, and this is my application column. Again, I just took the title column and renamed that, but that was a display rename. Everything I'm referencing here as far as the site column within that list is the internal name of that site column, right? I'm not going to go into detail what's the difference between internal and external and how you find it. Well, I will show you how to find it, because that would be key. That would be helpful. So how to find it, if you're looking at any one of these columns, if you actually sort by that column, right, and then look at the URL, sort field equals, that's the internal name, and that's the name for that column that you're going to use in your formula. Now you can go off and rename these columns, but it will always be the internal name that the formula will reference, which makes sense, right? Because you don't want to set up all these formulas and then all of a sudden the site admin or the site owner goes through and say, oh no, this name, a more user-friendly name for this column is XYZ. You don't want all your formulas to break, so that's why it leverages the internal name. All right, so here the title, which is internal name, is equal to equipment 2, which is a space equipment space 2, right? Now if I end this, the first thing it's going to do is that it's going to do a query, and it's going to apply that condition against that query, and then it's going to return the first matching row. And that's important, and that's really the one of the big differences with the lookup compared to the filter and search. Again, you have to do your homework and get familiar with those two. But with a lookup, it will only return one single record or list item in this scenario of the matching condition. And once you have that single record, now you can read out. I can do a dot and read out the ID or any other site column on that list item. Right, so now if I go here, this is going to be blank, but if I publish this up, so let me just go to file. My preview is blank because I'm not sure how it's grabbing the real data. So I think the best way to test something like this, especially when going against other data sources, is to just do it in SharePoint. So I'm going to just publish this up in SharePoint. And we were on the edit screen. So that change was in edit. So I have to take an existing item and go to edit. And if now, there's a couple of things that's going to happen, and I'll explain what's happening if there's not a match, and that's what we're going to get, right? Because currently I'm not a admin for this process, right? So if there's not a match, is that ID property is going to be blank, right? So now if I come in here to my ACL list, find my name, Deshaun Clark, and let me just go into QuickEdit. It just allows me to change these values quickly and change my value to admin, and it's going to read out the ID of this, which we don't care about. We don't care what the ID is for this particular row, but it's going to spit that out. Now if I hit refresh, go in this guy here, hit edit, and now I should get a number. 1, right? So that's the number. And now to confirm that that's the actual ID, again, we don't care about the ID. We're just trying to prove a point here. I can add in, let me get out of quick edit mode. I can tell it to display the ID. I forgot to hit apply. Sorry, 1 second. So now I can come in here and tell it to display the ID, right? So the ID is 1. Now if I log in with a test user 2 and change this to an admin, it will spit out 2, right? So that's neither here or there, but that's just something to be aware of. So if you have to use the lookup to find a match, right? You don't care if there's multiple, you just want to grab them to confirm if something is a match, then this is something that you can do. But in our scenario, we actually want to do a true false, right? So let me just copy this. Let me reset this back to what it is, so details, right? And we were just using that to confirm. But really, real world scenario, what we want to do is disable this unless the current user is the admin. So let's go into display mode, which is have our enable, disable option, right? Whereas edit, view, and disable are the different view modes, and then just drop this into an if statement. Now let me use this new feature to where I can expand this out. We're not confined to that single line text box. We can expand it out so we have some breathing room. And I'm gonna just paste in this lookup, and now because I'm in the if statement, this whole formula needs to return a true false, a Boolean value. Now in order to do that, there's one other parameter, and this is the optional, where from the result set you can manipulate the result set, or you can put a condition on there. And here, because I know ID is going to spit out blank if there's not a match, and then the actual number if there is a match, and I know the ID from a SharePoint list can never be 0, I'm going to say where the ID is greater than 0. So if there's not a match, this is going to be false. If there is a match, it's going to be a number which is going to be greater than 0, and it's going to be true, right? So that's just one of those tricks. And this is going to save you a lot of heartache, in the sense that, you know, I could say, okay, you know, find this filter criteria. It's going to return only a single row. I can read out the email of that row and then compare it to the current user, which I know it has to be true, and do a true false in that way, right? So that's just another way of doing it. But I like the ID piece because it's just less typing, right? So if this is true, the display mode should be edit, and if it's not true, the display mode should be disabled, right? And again, all we're doing is just comparing to make sure that for the current user, if they're an admin, then I'm going to manipulate the display mode property. That's it. I can do the same thing for visible. I can do the same thing for any other number of scenarios that meet your business requirement. And we're going to start to compound these here in a little bit, but I just want to make sure that we understand the concept of the lookup, and it has two modes, right? You can set a condition on the results to force it to return a true false, or you can take that current record that matches the results and understand that if it's empty, it's going to be null or blank, or else it's going to allow you to manipulate properties. So you can do certain things, other tricks like that as well. All right, so that's that. Let's just leave that there, and let's go ahead and push this up just to make sure this works as expected. And all I'm going to do is just toggle my role, because I'm Deshaun Clark, I'm the current user. I'm going to toggle my role and just see if we can get that button or that tab to be enabled and disabled. All right, so here we go. And I mean, there's a lot here, right? I mean, this opens up so many possibilities, so many scenarios, because what I'm sitting on right now is when the item is created, meaning that the only way you can change this through edit mode, you can apply logic. So you say for existing items, this role can only make these changes. Or you can say for new items, a new user can make the change, but once it's created, only this role can make change. You can do that. That's what we're doing, right? With the edit option, right? So let me just hit refresh. I want to make sure all my logic is loaded and I'm dealing with the latest and greatest. Oops. I'm clicking on things, it's not responding. I'm clicking on something else and it responds late. Alright, so here we go. Alright, so now this guy is enabled. I can bounce between it. I can come in here, I can change the description field. So now if I come into my ACL list and again do a quick edit, remove me as an admin, downgrade me to an approver, and then come back to this guy, hit refresh, the expectation is that detail button is now disabled and I can't change it, right? So I go here, hit edit, be patient, let this thing load, and as you can see, its detail is disabled. And the other cool thing about it is your disabled color is different than our color to where something is clickable. So again, you kind of get that visual effect that, oh, this is disabled. And of course you have full control over that. I mean, they expose all those properties to those buttons to change that. All right, so now we have that disabled. So only admins, once an item is created, only admins can change it. So let's just prove that. I'm not an admin, so I'm going to come in here, create new. This description field is available. I can change it. I can do whatever I need to do. This is going to be test 1, 2, 3. I can come over here, grab a icon to a photo. I'm sorry, the URL to a photo. Just paste this in, put the cost in, just call this $45 and hit save. Right? So once the item is created, that description is locked in. Once it's created, it's golden. No one can change it unless you're an admin. There's my test, there's my field, boom, 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 boom. All right, very simplistic, probably not a realistic scenario, maybe, I don't know, it really depends on the process, but you kind of get a gist of how to do that. Now here's the thing, this lookup formula, right, this process is super sweet, but every time we need to use it, you see the syntax, right, and you can see this can be nasty and this can get ugly real quick depending on how many times that you need it. Anytime that you need it, you need to define this logic. So you don't want to define this logic over and over and over again, right? So how can we encapsulate this or tuck this away to something more simplistic? And then here we're only taking into account the admin role. How can we expand this out to take into account the other roles? Because we have approver and we have buyer. Well, here's the way to do that. Now we're going to leverage our trusty SharePoint integration again. And let's just go over here and it says on edit. Right, what you want to do, again, these have to be semicolon delimited. Let's create a variable, right, and just call it is admin, and that would equate to the value, the output of that lookup, which in our scenario is going to be true or false. A nice name for a Boolean type variable and it also encapsulate the row. Okay, fine. Let's take it another step. Let's copy this. So now we have our admin out the way. What if we want to leverage this for approver? Right? The only change I need to make is this guy here. It's the approver, the role value that I'm comparing it against. Right? Everything else remains the same. Current user comparison, ensure that this is for the equipment title, blah, 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 blah. Now, equipment title here, this is the reason why we have it. What if we were doing the package tracking app or process that we build that's a Power App against a list? Same format that we're doing here. Now I can just go in there instead of the title being equipment 2, the title would be package tracker. Boom. That's all the ACO checks for there, right? So okay, so let's close this out with buyer is buyer, and then here in the row value, just put buyer, right? All right, stick with me. I know we're in here, we're 25 minutes in, but there's an important piece I gotta show you because we can do all this work, and without this final piece that I'm gonna show you here in a second, this is null and void. Right? And I know those who are used to security trimming forms know exactly where I'm going. All right, so is set buyer, and this is all set. So here that's my on edit, right? And again, you may or may not need this for, hold on, did I get everything? No, I didn't. So I just want to copy this to make sure I have the logic for admin, is approver, is buyer. So I have all three of them. I just want to copy that. And again, you may or may not want to use this for all the events, right? So here we just set it for the edit event. So on edit, so anytime I'm using my edit form, these are going to be available. They're going to be set. They're available everywhere, but they're going to be set for my edit form. For the new form, I want to have these set as well. So I just come in here, paste those in, right? Everything's the exact same because there's no changes here. We just want to make sure all three rows are accounted for in check and are set. And then for the view, I want to go in here and check them and paste that in as well. Now, this may be overkill for your scenario. I don't know. You may say, hey, I'm only doing a row check when we're in edit mode, or I'm only going to do a row check when we're in new mode. Okay, for those respective events, only apply those. But if you want to do a row check for all three modes, if it's view, edit, or new, then go ahead and set it for all three events. Okay, so now that's set, I can come back to my scenario and just collapse this where my detail button, and now I can make this a lot cleaner and say, instead of doing this nastiness, let's build it from scratch. So instead of doing, so now I want to do, if it is admin, right, and you see my IntelliSense kicking in here, or let me get fancy, is approver. Or you can get fancy and say is approver. Well, I'm not going to do this because I don't think I have this wired up. I was going to leverage the status, right? So there's a status column that I have, but I don't have it wired up, so I'm not going to play with it here. But just to show you, now you can go in and say, or if status is submitted and the current user is approver, then enable this. But if the status is approved, then only the admin can change it. You see where I'm going with this? I mean, you're open to do all this kind of business logic to where it probably was pretty complex to do before. So let me just do this. Let me just say admin is approver or approver, right? And then do we want to enable it. So display mode is edit. And if they're not one of those roles, disable. All right, and that's it. That's it. All that nastiness to this, and we're comparing two roles. Whereas with the old one, the explicit piece, without using these global variables, you have to do the lookup twice. Once for the admin and then once for the approver. Maybe not. Maybe you can do an or. I don't know. Yeah, you probably could do an or. It makes sense that you can, because in that condition, you can wire that up any way that you want. All right, and that's it. So now let's go here, File, hit Save, and hit Publish. Push that out. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to compare to make sure this works, right? Because we set up our global variables, so we're setting those at the time that the form is loaded, and we just want to compare, make sure that works. Once we do that, now we're going to do a test for, I'm an administrator, so I see everything. I can modify this list, I can control this list, I can do a lot more than an average user, but now we want to test out with an average user, and that's when the gotcha comes in. All right, so let's go ahead and kick this in. Let me hit F5, make sure I'm getting the latest and greatest. Select this again. Alright, so here's test, hit edit here. And now we are, how do we do? Alright, so we're enabled. Right? So now if I go to my control list, that's Deshaun Clark, I am an approver. So let me switch my role to a buyer. And if I hit refresh, this should go disabled, right? Because it was admin or approver who would be able to see that. And again, we didn't do the fancy one to where you can do a status check to confirm if the approver role can do it. I'll just leave that up to you. Very simple to do though. Very simple to do. All right, so here's that, and now it's disabled. So as a buyer, I can't change it, right? All right, so now let me slide this over. This is me logged in as the test user in incognito mode within Chrome, right? So as a test user, and I've only given them any user that you're going to have to interact with this list, meaning that they have the ability to submit the request. You don't want to give them member access, right, to your site. That's one of the gotchas, right? Because if you give them member access, then what you're doing is you're allowing them to, oh, you're locking down your form, but what stops me from coming in here and hitting quick edit on this list and then manipulating the list that way, right? So there's two things that you want to do, and you don't want them to modify your schema or anything like that. You only want them to submit, but you have to give them contributor access to submit. By default, these security groups that you get with these modern sites is going to give you edit access, which is a level above contribute from a permissioning level there. So here's the proper way to secure your list. And so the second step is that you need to harden your list, right? So now I'm gonna go into this list, and I have some of these already enabled because I was playing with it before. Go into the advanced tab, and by default, the ability to use quick edit, this quick edit property that allows them to edit inline. You saw me do that when I was editing the ACL list. This, by default, this is yes. This has to be turned to no, because that means they can use the list to edit those site columns, and we want to lock that down, right, to only be able to manage that editing through the form itself, right? So that's the first thing you must do. Turn the quick edit property off. Shut that down. Now, once you have that shut down, the other thing you have to do is grant contribute permissions to that list only. Now, in order to do that, you have to come in here, permission levels, hit stop inheriting, right? And that's just going to give you a copy from your site level and then drop that into your permissions. And we need to add them. We don't want to add them to any one of these groups other than visitor. So all of our users will be added to visitor, and you can easily do that by using the everyone user, add them to the visitors group. But then what you need to do is come up here, go to site settings and people in groups, and create a new group. And this group don't necessarily have to have, and you can figure out how you want to leverage this, because if you want to say only these people should be able to submit requests to this list, then you want to create a group just for your process. But if you want to say no, these applications are open to the org in general, I want to give them access to submit requests, but that's it. I don't want them modifying my list. I don't want them adding columns. I don't want them modifying the default view or creating public views. They can create private views because that's the way SharePoint works. So you kind of want to lock that down, right? So in order to do that, what we're going to do is come in here and create a group. Just click on more here, create a new group, and I'm going to just call it business apps, right? And then once you create this group, here's the most important thing, And this is why we have so many security issues within SharePoint, because it goes with creating custom groups. Not necessarily creating the groups, but what you do after you create that group. Now, once you create this group, all these permission level options, leave them blank, because this, what you want to do is just create an empty group with no general access or no default access at all. If you do anything here outside of read, which you automatically get with visitor, you're going to give them contribute, edit, design, or full control over your entire site and everything within that site, right? If it's inheriting permissions. So here, once you create your group, just hit create. Do not set any permission levels on the group at all at that level. Now what you want to do is go back to your list and go to equipment 2 and then modify the permission levels for that list. There's probably an easier way, a quicker way to do that. Come on, where's my gear icon? Let's go to list settings. And now once you're in list settings, we're going back to where we were initially. So permissions for this list. So I probably did the steps a little bit backwards. You probably want to go out there and create your group first. But if it's a global group, like if you're managing all the business apps within this site, I would say try to create one for all the apps if that meets your scenario. So that way for each business application, you're not creating a SharePoint group for each application, which is overkill. All right, so here we have our unique permissions. Now we're going to hit grant permissions. We're going to grab that business app group, right? And the access we want to give them is contribute, right? That's the lowest level of write access that you want to give them. Edit access gives them the ability to modify your list, right? To delete your list and do some really nasty things that you don't want them to do. So contribute is plenty for what they need. I should have unchecked that send invitation. I didn't have anyone in the group other than myself, so that's fine. All right, so once that's done, now you have this business app. They have contribute access, which is all they need. And then under the business app group, you go ahead and add in your user. And in my scenario, it's going to be my test user, right? I really wish they had this option unselected by default, but they don't. All right, so once that's done, now as a test user, again, this is me in incognito mode, log in as test. I hit refresh, and now I have the ability to create a new item. I can edit existing items, but I cannot modify this. I cannot change the view, right? So if I make a change here to say, okay, let's sort by descending, and then I want to save that, what this is going to do is force me to do a private view. A private view versus public view is only available to the current user, the person who created that view. So, if I'm working with this and say, okay, yeah, I need to see only my stuff and manipulate it that way, or filter by, I can come up here and say filter by created by, where the current user is me, right? This is only my stuff, and I want to save this off and say my stuff. No one else can see this. This is only the test user can see this, right? So you allow them to create views, right, to help them be productive and be efficient, but they're not modifying the views that you set up as the default view. All right, so that's one piece. So now what I want to do is come in here. Let me just show everything and create an item. And then come over, I have Amazon open up in a separate window just so I can grab some cool images. Alright, so I got this Kingston solid state dry. That's $12. No, $20. It's still a good price. That's $20. And I just want to grab the image URL from that. Let me just grab that here, drop that here. $21.99, and then blah 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 for the description. Let's not do that. Let's do a decent description, right? All right, and then save that all. All right, so now that's there, and now if I come in and say, oh crap, that wasn't the right description, let me change it. Go into edit mode. The detail view is removed. I can't change it. right? And then now, as an administrator of that business process, someone who is not in IT, and that's what you want to do with these business processes, right? You want to turn these over to the business. Okay, I created this for you guys. You guys manage it as far as like access control. There's no ServiceNow ticket or request ticket or help desk ticket needed for that. This is your process. You manage it, and I don't have to give them admin access or owner access to the entire site or site collection, right? I can just give them the needed access to manage this list, which is really contribute, because all they're doing is adding users and removing users and changing values. All they need is contribute. They don't need to modify the schema or any of the other stuff that will potentially get them in trouble, right? All right, so as my test user, I can come in here, change this to admin, right? And then slide this guy back over. Where's my incognito mode? And that's grayed out. Hit refresh. And that should be enabled now. Right? Hit edit. And now I can come in here and modify it. Now, once you kind of see this scenario done with a test user, the other thing that usually comes up to only be able to edit certain fields if it's a request that you submitted, right? And really quick, I'm going to do this really quickly, and then I'm going to let you go. So if I go to, let's just see here. Let's go, if I'm in edit, that means I'm trying to modify something that already exists. I'm holding down, now this button here, now cost, for example. You can only change the cost if it's a request that you submitted, right? So, or else it's disabled. All right, so same deal. Fine, I can handle that. So I'm coming into my display mode, unlock it, go into advanced, unlock, and give me some breathing room here. Put in my if statement. So if admin or user dot email, again, this is how I do my current user check. User check. If the current user email is equal to the author email, which is this item dot author, which is the creator dot email, then allow this to be enable or edit, right? So display mode, edit. Sorry, throwing my parentheses in way too early. Display mode, edit, right? Come on. Else disable. Display mode dot disable. Close parenthesis, right? So if they're admin or if the user is the one who created it, then allow them to change it. Let's take the admin piece out. All right, you just say, okay, if you created this, and you can change the price. Else, you can't change the price. You only can change the price for your stuff, right? Let's push this over here. Hit save. Publish, and then go from there. And you can do the same scenario, right, for the different statuses, right? Because one thing we didn't do is put the flow behind this. But once you put the flow behind this, that flow is going to be updating the status field for each and every check or stage in the process. And then you can lock things down. And that's more realistic, right? Whereas, it's like, oh, okay, once this thing is approved, no one should change it or no one should be editing this, right? Because, it doesn't make sense to have certain parameters of a request approved and then someone comes behind them and change it without it going right back through the approval process. Or maybe that's something that you do, you send it back through the approval process. All right, so here we go. This is a test user. I'm logged in as Deshaun. Hit edit. Cost field is disabled. And that was test 13132. Right? So now, hit refresh here. This is my test user session. I click on that. Click at it. And now I can change it. But as a test user, if I go into test 123, which is Deshaun who created that, it's locked out. Boom, just like that. Just like that. So that's it for this video. I'll catch you in the next video. Until then, take care.